call. Thank you. Mr Sims, I wanted to just touch on the statement of expectations that was recently issued by to the ACCC by the Minister for Communications. From a process perspective, had you or anyone on staff seen a draft of the statement of expectations prior to it being issued?
Yes, we did.
Right. So when were you consulted about that?
So what, it came out about a week and a half ago, I think.
It was signed on the 9th of October.
Thank you. Look, I could give you precise times if you want them, but I think about a week and a half prior to that.
So a week and a half. Can you tell me what the legal basis is for the statement of expectations that's been issued?
Not essentially my forte on the legal basis for it. I'll see whether Mr Gregson knows, but as I understand it, I mean, we get these from the Treasurer in relation to the main things we do.
Indeed.
But since we're also the wholesale regulator of communications, that's the Minister Fletcher's area. And so he's provided one in communications just like the Treasurer does, but I assume there's scope for that under the Act, but I honestly don't know unless Mr Gregson's going to come to my rescue.
Unfortunately, Chair, I'm not able to tell you whether that's part of a legislative requirement or whether it's a protocol, but it's consistent with the approach that we have with ministers and our responses through that statement of intent. But we can get you that detail.
Well, I would like to understand it because it's not clear to me that there is a legal basis for the direction, and as you know, for an independent authority, there are usually the relationship with the executive government is clearly defined in the legislation. It would help to know which part of the legislation the Minister's statement of expectations is grounded in. Yeah, no,
this isn't unique to the ACCC. This is consistent with practices across departments and agencies. And I think the characterisation as a direction may not be quite consistent with the approach. That statement of expectations is not a direction, and we get a chance to...
Well, there is a power of direction under the Act,
yes,
which is separate. But this, I mean, each time we've had a new Treasurer or a new government, we've had a statement of expectations from them. But look, we'll get back to you on the legal basis. Right.
And have you ever received one from the Minister for Communications before?
My understanding is we have not, but unless Mr Cosgrove has a different answer. Am I right, Mr Cosgrove, that we haven't had one from Minister Communications in your memory?
That's correct, Senator. We've not previously had one from the Minister of Communications.
No. And what's your intention in terms of responding to the Minister's letter?
As I understand, we have a certain period to respond, so we'll be considering that and writing back. But I mean, the essence of the statement of expectations is to keep the Minister informed of what we're doing, and to, I think the essence of it is to start work on a new structural access undertaking which will govern the regulatory arrangements of the NBN, which have been somewhat in abeyance because the previous structural access undertaking applied to the fibre to the node model, and when we went to the MTN model, it was just sort of left hanging.
Fibre to the node or fibre to the premises, Mr Sims?
Fibre to the premises. Fibre to the premises, Senator, the original bill.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
So that's right, we did the original regulation under the fibre to the premises model.
Just back on the question of the legal foundation, Mr Gregson, the Minister's letter says, I look forward to receiving a statement of intent outlining the ACCC's plan for meeting these expectations within 3 months from the issuing of this statement. Could you tell me where I would find the basis for the Minister's expectation that this would be met within 3 months?
Well, I think that would be bound up in the same answer we can give you very quickly.
I expect that's
unless
right.
Mr Cosgrove can assist us with the framework.
No, he's nodding that he can't.
No, but it is...
But we can get that to you in short notice.
And each time we've had one from the Treasurer, we've always been required to respond to that within a certain period of time. So, to be honest, this hasn't struck us as out of the ordinary, although as you observe, we haven't had one from the Minister of Communications before.
What's the S stand for? The access undertaking. I wanted to understand how the existing...
access.
I'm really sorry, Mr Cosgrove, you're breaking up a little bit.
But you hadn't asked him a question, I think, had you?
Not really,
No.
So the special access undertaking essentially defines the way that the wholesale service can be provided to other retailers who wish to access the infrastructure
That's right.
produced by the NBN.
Particularly goes to price.
And can I ask about the recent decision to overbuild the copper network with what is being described as an on-demand fibre arrangement? There's obviously been some public discussion about whether the revenue derived from the particular model adopted by the NBN will cover the costs. I understand that the plan assumes that by 2024 only 1 in 10 premises in the fibre to the node footprint will have an actual fibre lead-in built, for example.
Yeah.
Which suggests that the revenue, the rate at which the revenue increases is, limited, and it's a very expensive undertaking. Is there a risk that if this residential overbuild doesn't generate a return, that entry-level and mid-tier pricing will be increased to compensate?
Not if we have anything to do with it.
Right.
We're intending to peg the price of the entry-level product, and that would be pegged irrespective of what happens with that particular initiative. And indeed, that's what we're working on right now, to peg that entry-level price. Right,
okay. And is that dependent on establishing a new access undertaking?
We went down the path of looking at an access undertaking, and when we started on that journey, the price we had in mind for that 12.1 product was very different to the price NBN had in mind. Now we're so close, and we've also been talking to them about service standards. Our judgment is we're so close that they've agreed they're going to put our new agreement, which is NBN moving a long way from when we started, into their WBA4 new agreement with the retailers. And if they do that, then we'll probably hold off issuing an access undertaking, firstly because we've achieved what we wanted to achieve, and secondly that gives us flexibility, not having made the undertaking, to keep an eye on a very dynamic market.
The Minister's direction obviously prioritises an access undertaking and indicates a preference for a building block approach. Is that consistent with what you're currently thinking?
In the sense that they're slightly different things. We have the ability to issue access undertakings which can override contractual agreements, and we can do that under particular provisions of the Competition and Consumer Act.
Right.
What the Minister wants us to do is put in place, as we had before, a comprehensive long-term. So what we've done with the access undertaking is just deal with 12.1 and deal with the service standards. What the Minister's talking about is going back and doing something like we had before in the fibre to the premises, which was a more comprehensive set of regulatory requirements on their pricing and on their services, and that's something we're quite happy to work towards. It's complicated, but we've always realised we had to do it.
Right. So at the moment, you have not intervened on these pricing questions in relation to the overbuild of the copper network, the recently announced bill.
Oh, that's very recent announcement, yeah.
is there anything to prevent the costs associated with that build being integrated into the asset base and then being recovered from customers?
Well, that would be picked up in the new undertaking, the comprehensive undertaking, so that would be something we'd have to look at there. But, I mean, the issue we have to keep in mind is that we want to make sure that the pricing on the NBN bears some relationship, certainly at the entry level, to the pricing that existed before the NBN was built. We don't think people should be paying more for getting the same thing or getting what they would have got had the NBN not been built. Sure, pay a lot more for the massive extra speed that people are able to get, but don't pay more for what you could have got before. So we want that to continue to underpin the arrangements. And of course, and that plus other limitations on how NBN can do its pricing will have to work in concert with their ability to get a return on their assets. So, I mean, the original five...
I mean, might they be... sorry to interrupt you, Mr Sims, but might they not actually be inconsistent principles? If a very large investment is made in a piece of infrastructure that appears unlikely to generate sufficient returns to cover the costs, that could be inconsistent, in fact, with maintaining an entry-level pricing model that is similar to that was available prior to the introduction of the NBN.
Not in our mind. We have that entry-level price pegged at what we judge, and we've now got NBN to agree, the prices could have been for providing that service under the old ADSL arrangements. So we're not going to... look, we'll go into this with an open mind, but I'd be very surprised if we're going to change from that fundamental principle.
I see.
The idea of what NBN spends in future, that's really what this overarching agreement's going to do. There's going to have to be arrangements in place where regulatory approval of these things is needed, and you've got a construct for how that's going to be priced. But given where NBN's at, we're going to have to put in place price constructs that limit them simply getting a return on whatever they invest. There's going to have to be other mechanisms that mean they're going to have to jump certain hoops to ever recover their investment.
Right, so your model at the moment is to constrain the price and they can make the decisions about the investment, but you anticipate a future scenario where there might be decisions made about investment that within a particular framework that then determine the price.
That's right, but it does depend...
And that transition would take place when?
Oh, well, that's what Minister Fletcher is asking us to now think about. So, it was always on our agenda to do this. That's why that letter of expectations is really asking us to do something that we know we've got to do. But when we meant, just quickly if I could, when we went from the special access undertaking that applied to fibre to the premises, we had in place a whole range of arrangements that we thought would limit pricing. Over time, it worked out that those arrangements we had in mind didn't work as effectively as we thought. When the multi-technology model came along, that meant that previous agreement, which actually had a few defects in it, didn't actually apply anymore, and that gave us the ability to issue these access undertakings, which we're about to do, to peg those prices. So I think there's been advantages in that original construct falling away, and I could explain the problem if you'd like, but probably not the time.
You're aware that, yes, and I'm sorry that this is a more rushed conversation than I'd like. You might be happy that it's rushed. The Department of Communications has conceded that the NBN peak funding is going to reach $57 billion by 2024. And that forecasts only 1 in 10 premises will have the fibre lead-in built by 2024. So there are, at least in the government's plan, to 2040, very significant capital costs that are not presently accounted for in the pricing structure. That's right, isn't it?
Whether it's a sort of a modelling exercise as to whether with current price constructs they could ever get a return on that capital. My own view is that whether they do or not is really not an important issue. The important issue is that we price the NBN effectively so that we get the benefit of the NBN for Australians and we get maximum use out of the NBN.
You often talk about this, and you've recently commented that we seem often so focused on assisting the owners of infrastructure that we lose sight of the damaging effect on the users. I should acknowledge that that's a general comment that you're making. In this task that the Minister has just provided to you through his statement of expectations, what does that principle mean in this case?
Oh, I don't think it changes much in our mind. I mean, the concern I expressed was a general concern because we're privatising assets in a way that often sees the price go up. Users lose just so we can sell them for a very big price, which I don't think is a very good idea. Here, what we've got to do is just make sure that we get the benefit of this very important technology that can provide very fast data. And, you know, the good news is it was built in time as COVID arrived, so we've all been able to take advantage of it. But we've got to keep in mind that what's important here is getting the most efficient use of this $50 billion spend, as distinct from necessarily getting a return on that spend. And I think that's a principle that applies for a lot of infrastructure where government has fundamentally been the one that's built it.
Thanks, Mr Sims. Thanks, Chair. I do have some other questions, but I think it would be better to share the call.
Okay, Senator